For this video, we will be covering the project setup steps and GUI navigation for STREAMdiff. We'll be using PDF files for this exercise, but we'll point out the specific AFP and metacode settings required when comparing those output types. After the initial project setup, STREAMdiff will work exactly the same no matter which output type is being compared, so the experience will be consistent. Let's get started. Before we begin the compare in STREAMdiff, it's important that we have the proper folder structure set up. It's recommended that you create a new folder for each set of files that you want to compare. Then within that folder, we suggest having a separate folder for the control or baseline file and a separate folder for the test or modified file. For example, I have two PDF files on my desktop that I want to compare. Since these files are statements, I'm going to create a folder called statements. And then within that folder, I'll create a separate folder for the control or the baseline file, and a separate folder for my test or modified file. Next, I'll copy the correct PDF files into their respective folders. So I'll drag the control file into the control folder and the test file into the test folder. Once these folders are created and I have my PDF files in them, I can now begin the project setup in STREAMdiff. The project setup in STREAMdiff starts by opening the STREAMdiff GUI. Once the STREAMdiff GUI is open, you should see a screen similar to this. To start a new project in STREAMdiff, we'll start by clicking on the piece of paper icon in the upper left, the New button, or by going to File, New. This will display the project setup window. Now there are a number of settings and options in this window, but for right now, the two that we're concerned about are the control file and the test file dialog boxes. This is where we tell STREAMdiff which two files we want to compare. You can select your control and test files in two ways. The first way is to just drag and drop the control file or the test file to its correct dialog box like this. Or if you click on the browse button at the end of the dialog box, you can browse to and select the appropriate file like that. Now, since these are PDF files, there are no other settings that we need to select. However, if you were comparing AFP or metacode files, there are a few additional settings. When selecting AFP or metacode, you will be prompted with one additional menu like this. We'll select AFP files so we can see what the AFP settings look like. Now, depending on how your AFP files are created, if they have external resources, things like fonts, page segments, if those are external to the AFP file, you will need to specify a resource directory here in the middle. That basically tells STREAMdiff where those resources are. It's essentially just a folder that has those resources in it, but it tells STREAMdiff where those resources are, so when STREAMdiff compares those AFP files, it can pull in those appropriate resources. In addition, down at the bottom, there's a drop-down box for form definition. So after you select your AFP files, if there are any form definitions available in those AFP files, those will be populated here in this drop-down box. If you want to use a specific form definition, you can select that from the drop-down list. Now for metacode, if we switch the output type to metacode, there are similar settings. Like the AFP files, if there are any external resources for the metacode files, again, things like fonts, code pages, images, you'll also need to specify a resource directory or folder where those are located. In addition to that resource directory, there are some additional specific metacode settings here in the middle. The first setting is the record delimiter. This essentially tells STREAMdiff what type of metacode or how the metacode file is formatted. So select the appropriate record delimiter here from the drop-down list. And then the JSL and the JDE. These JSL and the JDE will become populated after you specify that resource directory. So after you select the resource directory, you can then select the start JSL file from this drop-down list, and then within that JSL file, it'll populate the available JDEs. Just select the correct JDE here as well. And then lastly, STREAMdiff does have some internal files that are necessary to compare metacode files. So the first time you set up a project, you're going to want to check this copy standard resources. This will copy those resources to the resource directory so that STREAMdiff can properly render those Xerox files. And this has to be done just once for a new project. Once you copy these standard resources, you do not have to do that again for the project. All right, so that covers the specific AFP and Xerox metacode file settings. So we'll switch back to PDF since those are the files that we're comparing, and just click on Save and Exit. So we're now back to our project setup screen where we've selected the two PDF files that we want to compare in STREAMdiff. So after we've selected those two files, all we have to do is click on the OK button. Now that STREAMdiff has run the compare and is displaying the results, let's briefly talk about the windows and navigation. So the two main windows in the middle are your control and test file viewers. This is going to display the two files that we selected in the project setup window. So you can see here on the left-hand side, you have your control or baseline file with the word control on the upper left. And then on the right side, you have your test or modified file with the word test in the upper left-hand corner of that window. So a nice side-by-side view of both of those files. On the right-hand side, you have your page list. This page list tells us how many pages we compared. In this case, we compared pages 1 through 20. It also color codes those pages based on whether or not there are differences on the page. For example, pages 3, 9, and 15 are green. That tells us that those pages have no differences on them. The other red pages have at least one difference. In the lower left-hand corner, this is the difference category window. This is going to show you what types of differences are present on the page. The different categories are page attributes, which are things like page size, page resolution, differences, things like that. Then you have categories for text, images, and graphics. So those are the main categories. And the idea in this window is any category with a red X next to it, like the variable text or variable image category, those are the types of differences that are present on this page. If I double click on one of those categories, so I'll double click on the variable text category. When I do that, a couple things happen. You'll notice that in the control and test windows, I now have red arrows pointing to where those variable text differences are present. So we have one pointing to this blank space up here at the top, which happens to be some invisible text. And then we have another red arrow pointing to the phone number, which tells us there's a difference with the phone number. So very easy to see with those red arrows pointing to where those differences are present. In addition to the red arrows, you'll also notice that this table directly to the right of the category list is populated with two rows now. So the idea in this table is that for every difference on the page, it's going to have a row in this table. So you can see this first difference is our invisible text, and the second difference is our phone number. Notice when I click on these different rows, notice how this bigger red arrow shows up for the difference that I click on. So when I click on the phone number difference, it automatically scrolls and puts a bigger red arrow next to that phone number difference. So you know exactly which difference is active, which difference you're clicking on. On the left-hand side of STREAMdiff, we have our acceptance rules window. This acceptance rules window is where you create rules to accept differences. So for example, if we look at that phone number difference, if that is something that's acceptable, we can create a rule that accepts that, so STREAMdiff no longer flags that as a difference. The benefit of that is you don't have to verify that phone number difference on every single page. You can verify it once here, create a rule for it to accept it. It's going to save you a lot of time when verifying differences. As far as navigation goes, to navigate between the different pages, you can use these navigation buttons up here in the toolbar. Just click those to go to a specific page. Or in the page list, just double click on the page that you wish to navigate to. For example, if I want to navigate to page 10, I can just double click on page 10 and it'll automatically take me to page 10. All right, and for this initial compare, we compared 20 pages. Now I know there are more than 20 pages in my PDF file, so if I want to run more pages, all I have to do is in the upper right-hand corner, the last button is called the Recompare All Pages button. If I click on that, you can see it pops up this window right here. Within this window, I can tell STREAMdiff to compare a specific page range. So for example, if I wanted to compare starting maybe at page 10, I can control that like that. Just put page 10 there. That's going to be my start page. And then I compare 20 pages out from there. If I leave this set to 20, we'll just set that back to 1. But if I want to compare more pages or all pages, all I have to do is click on the All Pages button, click OK. And STREAMdiff is going to recompare all those pages for me. So you can see it kind of goes through, shows us which pages are different as it's running the comparison. Our compare is now complete. Looks like we compared 738 pages. So that's a good example of how you can increase the number of pages from that default of 20. This concludes the STREAMdiff project setup and GUI navigation video. If you have questions on any of the topics covered or any other support related matter, please contact the Paloma support team. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a great day.